Live from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta, this is Lawmakers. For February 9th, 2010, the 15th Legislative Day of the Georgia General Assembly. Here are your hosts.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Lawmakers. I'm Susan Hoffman.
And I'm Nwandi Lawson. Coming up on tonight's program, House Democrats say a Republican plan to collect unpaid sales tax revenue doesn't go far enough, and an exclusive interview with House Democratic Caucus Chair Calvin Smyre.
But first, our top story tonight, a bill giving local schools some spending discretion in light of tough economic times passes the House. The House okays a bill that gives local school systems control over how to spend their monies for the next 3 years. Representative David Caucus presented the bill, HB 908. He said due to the dicey economy, school systems should be able to spend their monies as they see fit. If they want to stave off teacher furloughs by redirecting, say, some library funds, they should be able to do it, he says. Caucus said that the bill was heavily debated in committee and took into account the thoughts and opinions of teachers and principals and school superintendents. Many in the House supported the measure, but they questioned whether it should be for 3 years or just one.
What this bill will do is will allow the systems to be able to approach their budgets, move the money around if they need to keep essential programs in place, if they need to hire additional teachers, whatever they need to do to make it through this tough economic time. Now, the bill specifically extends this waiver. It's a blanket waiver to the systems for 3 years.
We all understand the state of the economy today. And in the past, we have given a year-by-year flexibility for our school systems to get through each year's crisis, to be able to manage things and have some flexibility. I voted for the bill yet last year because it was about giving expenditure control flexibility for 1 year. That's not what this does. This does it for 3 years.
Representative Porter went on to say that he wanted to amend the bill, amend the legislation to make it 1 year rather than 3 years, but that House rules prevented him from doing so. He got quite vocal in the well. It was quite interesting today, calling on Republican leaders to roll back some of the restrictions on the amendment process. He acknowledged that the Hawk system was gone, but he said debate was still limited. He even tried to get House Speaker David Ralston to allow a vote to suspend House rules so that his colleagues could vote on his amendment. Ralston told him that he would not recognize him for such a motion, that he had the chance to amend the bill in committee per House rules. The bill, HB 908, passed 137 to 34. It moves to the Senate.
The Senate today voted to add physicians' assistants to the medical professionals with special malpractice immunity. That is when they volunteer their services to provide indigent health care services. Senator Lee Hawkins sponsors SB 344, an update to the Health Share in Volunteers Medicine Act.
55 clinics in the state of Georgia, and last year they served over 175,000 patients. Good News Clinic in Gainesville alone served over 18,000 patients. These patients are seen at a reduced cost or no charge at all. And while Washington is still unsettled on how to attack or solve part of the health care problem, Georgia is leading the way in seeing patients in these clinics at no cost to this state.
Senate Bill 344 passed without opposition and moves to the House. The Senate also agreed to update the telecommunications codes, acknowledging that telephone companies now also provide cable television and internet services. House Bill 168 passed the Senate 46 to 4. Now, 3 amendments and changes made in committee send that measure back over to the House. And finally, the Senate agreed to update the rules overseeing how state employees qualify for disability benefits. Senator Bill Heath encouraged the Senate to remove the requirement that the applicant receive medical examination in his home.
It does 2 things. One is it removes an antiquated requirement that a disability, the examination of a disability be conducted in one's home. We don't have a lot of doctors anymore that make house calls. And the second part clarifies the law so that in the case of a disability that your actual compensation is not greater than you would have received if you were still employed.
That, of course, Senator Bill Heath speaking from the well. House Bill 172 passed the Senate by a vote of 51-1. That measure was altered in committee, and so it also returns to the House.
And the House okays a bill to delete the address from public notice of second offense DUI offenders. Here's Representative Doug Collins to speak on the bill, HB 898.
House Bill 898 simply states in the second and subsequent DUIs, the defendant has to pay for having their picture and stuff put in the paper. All this does is simply take out their personal street address. We were receiving some complaints across the state where people were receiving, especially some females had been receiving letters from people in jail and other places that they saw the personal address that was in there. So we're simply just taking the personal street address out. There is an amendment in your book, which I fully support, which will still allow the city of the person offender to be on there. But other than that, nothing else changes. It does not change anything else except just simply protects the privacy right.
House Bill 898 passed 152-8. House also passed HB 963, a housekeeping measure to allow property owners to file property taxes electronically. HB 963 passed 162-4. It moved to the Senate, as does the other bill. Also today, House Democrats draft a plan that they say will help bring in hundreds of millions of dollars in uncollected sales taxes. In a post-session press conference, House Democrats told reporters that their bill would create a two-way communication path between local government and the State Department of Revenue so that each would know which businesses are up and running and responsible for turning in sales taxes. Democrats argued the Department of Revenue, the entity responsible for collecting the taxes, isn't doing an efficient job because it's not currently cross-referencing which businesses have applied for a sales tax ID number with the state and which have applied for a local business license with the local government. Therefore, businesses are falling through the cracks. Again, Democrats say they seek to close this gap, this hole.
The problem is, as the pilot project showed, about 25% of those who have business licenses do not have sales tax certificates, and they're cheating the system. And if we would go out and work closely and have a partnership with the State Revenue Department and local governments, we could collect much of that this year. In this fiscal year, as we design the supplemental budget, we anticipate it to be over $1 billion because Alabama found $1 billion. It's probably greater in Georgia. But just putting this in with the partnership with local government, we could collect enough to not furlough teachers and state employees.
The bill proposed by the Republican Party simply allows the Department of Revenue to get information it can already get. It requires cities and counties to send information up. The challenge is that the uncollected taxes are on the local level, so the best way to get those dollars is to send the information down to the people who know where the businesses are. This bill simply says that this has to be a two-way street. We send information up to the Department of Revenue, but the Department of Revenue has to provide what is public information back to local governments. If those local governments know where their businesses are and that they're not paying their sales taxes, they can go after that money. And to put into sharp relief why this is important, last year this House and the Senate and the Governor, the Republican Party passed a $428 million tax increase by eliminating the homeowners tax relief grant. If in this year we had been able to collect 25% more in each local government that has businesses, those are dollars that would go back into the pockets of citizens. Right now we're taking money in property taxes and in sales taxes, and what's happening now until this bill passes is that the dollars that are collected for sales taxes come from the pockets of all of our citizens, but into the pockets of business owners. It never makes it to the government. It never makes it to your school systems. Until we do this, what we're going to have is a broken system where information flows one way and funds go into the pockets of cheaters.
Republicans did drop a bill last week which they say will close this gap. They want to spend $20,000 to create a portal which would collect information from local governments on businesses in their jurisdictions. That way, the Department of Revenue would know which businesses to account for in their system. Republicans claim that the Democratic plan would potentially breach tax confidentiality statutes and that it serves no purpose for local governments to have tax information since they don't have the authority to collect taxes anyway. The Georgia Municipal Association supports both plans. Members just want a system in place to collect all of the taxes due. All sides are optimistic that something will pass this session, noting Every dime counts.
Last night, we heard from legislators who want to consider a tax on lottery tickets to increase the state revenues. Well, liberals and conservatives are saying that the bad economy is forcing the General Assembly to seriously consider tax increases.
In the General Assembly is an acknowledgement from some folks who a year ago would have said no new taxes in any circumstances. They're now looking for other ideas to use a more balanced approach.
Representative Chuck Sims continues to promote a return to taxing groceries as one approach to shoring up the budget. He says that although House Bill 67 did not make it to the House floor last year, it remains in play.
I've got colleagues here that last year were not interested in it at all. This year, things have changed. Had we passed that last year, we would be $1 billion to the good this year. And, hindsight's always 20/20, but there and again, it's just hard to raise taxes, and I understand that. I understand that people don't want to see any tax increase. But if we continue to cut, we're going to be and I think in some serious shape as far as education, corrections, and health care are in this state.
One bill that shows promise, according to the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, is Senate Bill 206. The measure does not create tax dollars. Instead, it requires the state to monitor how well tax collection and tax breaks work.
SB 206 is the first step in comprehensive tax reform. It is hard to look at the system as a whole if you don't know the impact of all the different tax cuts, if you don't know what the tax cuts are, if you don't know what they're costing us, if you don't know why they're there, if you don't know if they're effective. SB 206 will bring transparency, and once we have the transparency, then we can make some intelligent decisions on what tax breaks make sense, which don't, which we may need to expand, and which we may need to get rid of.
And tomorrow on Lawmakers, what an increased tax on cigarettes could mean for the state coffers and for consumers. House members today unveil a plan that they say could provide $1.5 billion a year for transportation by 2016. House Resolution 1358 would fund a transportation trust with up to 25% of the state's sales tax revenue.
Georgia has continued to boast being the fourth fastest growing state in the United States. We've continued to be the 49th as far as what we spend on infrastructure, as they've just displayed. I use the analogy, it's a brewing perfect storm. We're going to reach a point someday where the economic growth that we've enjoyed, the quality of life that we've enjoyed, the relative low tax base that we've enjoyed, are all going to be at peril if we don't find a long-term mechanism for funding statewide transportation.
The system would be driven by earmarking sales tax money for transportation projects, but only when the economy is moving smoothly.
As the revenues exceed the 2008 level, which is, frankly, the high watermark for state general fund revenues in the state of Georgia, as we exceed that FY 2008 funding level, in future years, as new revenue comes into the state, take advantage of putting about 25% of new dollars that come into the state aside for transportation purposes only. And frankly, problems that have taken us 20 to 30 years to get into can't be fixed in 2 or 3 years. So what H.R. 1358 is going to do, again, as we begin to grow our way out of recession and revenues have come back, we're able to restore those programs at levels that we, as a legislature, feel are appropriate, set about 25% of new dollars aside, taking advantage of those high growth years so that over 6, 8, 10 years, we can grow into committing about $1.5 billion per year for transportation purposes only.
Atlanta Representative Pat Gardner is the lone Democrat signed on to what is being billed as a bipartisan measure. She's also a sponsor of House Bill 1099. That's the Democrats' proposal to fund transportation with a portion of the state gas tax and to hold 50% of that money for mass transit.
There is support for long-range solutions to our transportation needs. And the assurances from the representative that this concept will maintain itself as a long-range concept and not interfere with the other bills that we think are very important that we've discussed today. So as you all know, you're political experts probably more than we are. We approach this with caution, but we need some vision for our state transportation in order to maintain the economic viability of our state.
Earmarking sales tax for transportation requires a change to the state constitution, so House Resolution 1358 will need the support of 2/3 of both the House and the Senate, and then approval by voters. Bill sponsors would like to have that measure on the ballot by November.
We continue our leadership series tonight. We have with us Representative Calvin Smyre. He is the House Democratic Caucus Chair. I started by asking him about the various plans to collect the uncollected sales tax revenues. Take a look.
Well, I'm optimistic about it, and in fact, I think this will be a good way for us to come together in a bipartisan fashion to be able to collect this uncollected sales tax. We are in the process of passing a budget sometime this week, an amended 2010 budget, and having to make various cuts there that deal with quality of life. If there was something that we could generate those uncollected sales tax, the people that are out collecting taxes but not reporting to the state, in essence, we would have more money to spend at the Department of Revenue, and thusly would have more in our state budget. So this is a main issue, and we hope we can come together with the other side of the aisle. We've advocated this over several years now, and we need to get these funds collected and get these people that are absolutely cheating the state out of funds, and we need to make sure that all taxes that are due to the state are collected.
The fact that Democrats and Republicans have both dropped plans on this does look as to be a positive move forward, with the potential, again, for millions of dollars should it all pan out. Let's move along to transportation. Democrats held a press conference recently, both House and Senate, basically saying we want to take the 4th cent on the sales tax on motor fuel and put that towards any transportation project. How has it been received by people in the Republican Party, both House and Senate?
Well, we've had a little give and take on this. This is an issue that we have discussed in the last 3 years, and I think we would be abdicating our responsibility as legislators if we don't leave this 2010 legislative session with something on transportation. We advocated the T-Splosh, where the 1% is dedicated to all forms of transportation, because after all, transit has not been one of our go-to points in state government, and commuter rail transportation, and we've always focused in on cars and concrete. So with that in mind, we've got to change focus in state government, we've got to change our priorities, and we've got to change our mode of transportation, and not just to be automobiles, but have a multiplicity as it relates to what all of our plans are as it relates to commuter rail and transit. So transit has to be a part of that formula to eliminate a lot of congestion.
T-Splosh, meaning these local regions could come together and decide to tax themselves. So you do favor some type of regional plan where, like the Metro Atlanta, could come together and tax itself?
We favor a regional concept where, hypothetically, in the metro area, you could come together with all the counties that are contiguous to Atlanta and the people could impose a 1 cent tax on sales that would be generated for mode of transportation.
All right. Very quickly, on the 2011 budget, what are you watching most closely?
Well, right now on 2011, we're very concerned about the draconian cuts that have to be made in education. Education is the escalator to upward mobility. It is the key to a better quality of life in our state for our citizens. It's a direct correlation to our workforce development and things of that nature. So education is key, and we want to try to see, even today in a bill that we dealt with on media centers and disciplinary actions discretionary actions that we had that give the local school boards the option of cutting back on some of those services. So it's all of these small areas that add up, but at the same time, instructional services, providing money to our local school systems, it has to be paramount. It has to be a top priority of the state to fully fund education. So with that in mind, if we had our druthers, there's any restoration of funds to the state budget, we think it ought to go to education.
All right. With that, I have to say thank you very much. Representative Calvin Smyre, Democratic Caucus Chair in the House. I appreciate your time on the show.
Thank you.
Well, he was sworn into the Senate following a runoff election last week, and today the Senate officially welcomed its newest member, Senator Hardy Davis.
Clerk will read communications from the Honorable Brian Kemp, Secretary of State, at this time.
I, Brian C. Kemp, Secretary of State of the State of Georgia, do hereby certify that at the special election runoff held on Tuesday, the 2nd day of February 2010, Hardy Davis, having received 5,802 votes, was duly elected to the office of Senator in the General Assembly for the 22nd District of Georgia. Through the order, Mr. President.
Very, very proud of our new member to our chamber. Let's give a warm welcome to the new senator from the 22nd. He's already been sworn in, and now he's going to get sworn out. So.
Here Here's an update on that cell phone legislation we have been following for you. House Bill 944, which would prohibit texting while driving, was heard in a House Public Safety and Homeland Security subcommittee today. The subcommittee has consolidated HB 944, sponsored by Representative Amos Amerson, with a similar bill, HB 938, sponsored by Representative Alan Peake. We do expect that the full House Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee will consider that texting while driving bill tomorrow.
A bill that prevents state funds from being used for salary increases for school administrators or school board officials in a year when school and staff are furloughed passed the House Education Subcommittee today. HB 977, which passed by substitute, goes on to say that if salary increases are provided using local funds, the local Board of Education must provide 30 days notice and present their rationale for the pay raise. The board must also hold a public hearing to allow for an open discussion and for public input. That bill now moves to the full House Education Committee.
And the Senate Insurance and Labor Committee passed two pieces of health care legislation today, Senate Bill 317 and Senate Resolution 794, which say that Georgians may opt out of any federal health care plan without penalty. Bill sponsor Senator Judson Hill explains the necessity for both a bill and resolution that essentially say the same thing.
The difference between the two is with the constitutional amendment, it precludes any future state legislature from tinkering with any type of law or right, and that's really preferred. The bill by itself is just as strong. However, a future court could come in and maybe rule it unconstitutional.
But I don't see it.
Both Senate Bill 317 and SR 794 passed 5-1. Senator Ed Harbison explains why he voted against both pieces of legislation.
It's a huge debate in Congress. There's been no official action. Nothing has been finalized. And as a matter of fact, the bill is almost in the portion where it's not going to pass. It's just simply premature.
And in other...
They both go to Senate rules.
All right, in other news, several pieces of legislation dealing with the humane treatment of animals are making their way through the General Assembly this year, and the Humane Society of the United States held its annual Lobby Day event today to make its position known on some of those bills. Lawmakers' Laura Fawaz has the details.
The Humane Society of the United States is lobbying on bills that would allow judges to issue restraining orders to protect pets, ban gas chambers for euthanasia, further regulate cockfighting, and make the taste of antifreeze unpalatable to animals.
We call HB 429 pet protective orders. This would allow a judge to put animals in the restraining order. And then 788, there are a few gas chambers left in Georgia, and they're, according to our resources, they are not being used properly. HB 109 is a bill to strengthen the cockfighting law. The last one, the antifreeze bill, this would simply put a bitter substance into antifreeze so that people and children could not be poisoned.
Georgia citizens came out with a passion for specific bills.
I'm here to talk to my representative about the gas chambers that are in the state of Georgia currently operating. I want change in the state of Georgia. We need to come to year 2010. Humane euthanasia should be the way.
Members and advocates for the Humane Society of the United States hope their lobbying efforts will gain support and attention from political leaders and help get animal legislation passed this year. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Laura Fawaz.
Thanks so much, Laura. And in honor of our 40th season, it is time for another Lawmakers Flashback.
Tonight, Senator Nathan Dean faces repercussions over the position he took on a sales tax increase in opposition to Lieutenant Governor Zell Miller.
Senator Nathan Dean of Rockmart in northwest Georgia was removed as chairman of the Senate Rules Committee by Lieutenant Governor Zell Miller. It was only the second year that Dean had held that position.
My only concern is that the people in my area feel comfortable with whatever actions have been taken. And in August of this year, I will give them once again the opportunity to see whether today is an elevation or a promotion in the district, the 31st of the state of Georgia.
Senator Roy Barnes, Governor Joe Frank Harris's floor leader, said Senator Dean's removal was almost unheard of.
Reasons given in the letter were that Senator Dean could not be the governor's floor leader and the chairman of the committee, divided loyalties, I guess. is the argument made by the Lieutenant Governor.
Is this an unprecedented action?
I can never remember where a chairman of a committee was removed in midterm, either in the House or the Senate. Maybe somebody will find something and bring it to me, but I can never remember it happening. I'm very sorry for Senator Dean. He is a fine senator, and I'm very disappointed.
Disappointed in whom?
I'm disappointed in the Lieutenant Governor.
Nathan Dean served in the Senate until 2004. Senator Barnes, of course, went on to become the 80th governor of Georgia. This has been a Lawmakers Flashback.
He was always known for his tousled hair, and he sure had it then, didn't he?
Sure did. I guess Senator Dean hadn't heard about Zell Miller back in those days. You know, we have a note about last night's flashback. We noticed that the Lawmakers 1984 crew made an error by identifying Senator David Scott as the late Tom Scott, former DeKalb County Tax Commissioner, who was also a senator at that time. The staff last night was trying to determine if David Scott was ever known as Tom, and our thanks to another Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report, for helping us solve that mystery.
Too funny.
You just never know where you can turn up some great information. Certainly stay tuned for more of these great flashbacks.
Of course, people love them.
Well, it's time now for news from around the state. For that, we're joined by Ricky Bevington. Take it away, Ricky.
Thank you, Wandy. Thrilled to be here. In news tonight, the latest revenue figures are out today from the governor's office, and they do show that tax collections are still down. Governor Prue's office says that the state took in more than $1.4 billion last month. That's down 8.7% from last January. That was when the state took in nearly $1.6 billion. This is the 14th straight month that tax collections in Georgia have dropped. The year-to-date fiscal year revenue drop is nearly 13%. A scandal-plagued school superintendent is leaving her job in Middle Georgia. Bibb County's Sharon Patterson steps down at the end of the month after 10 years on the post. She's under fire for allegedly failing to report several principals accused in different incidents, such as having an affair with a subordinate, choking a student, and possibly misusing federal funds. Patterson, though, does take with her nearly $200,000 to settle her contract, and Bibb County will also pay her legal fees while she fights these allegations against her. Today in Augusta, officials announced that a new minor league hockey team is on its way to that city. Owners of the yet unnamed team signed a 2-year lease with the James Brown Arena to host games beginning this fall. The announcement comes 2 years after Augusta's last minor league hockey team, the Lynx, folded due to financial problems. Officials with the Augusta-Richmond County Coliseum Authority say the new team will put a strong emphasis on community involvement. They say the team's owner and the players will live in the Augusta area. The new team will be part of the Southern Professional Hockey League. And there is more Georgia news at our website. It is gpb.org. You can follow us throughout the day on Twitter at GPB News. I'm Ricky Bevington in Wandy.
All right. Thanks so much, Ricky.
And tomorrow on Lawmakers, House Speaker David Ralston presents the amended fiscal year 2010 budget to the Appropriations Committee, and legislation that would prohibit texting while driving is also scheduled to be in full committee. We're going to have those stories and, of course, all the latest from Under the Gold Dome tomorrow at 7 p.m. And if you have missed any part of this program, please tune in when Lawmakers repeats tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. I always get such a kick out of that. I don't know why. Coming up on GPB Georgia Outdoors, tonight's episode features parents and heroes. Georgia Outdoors is next.
You never can tell what's coming up next. And, of course, you know, we going back to that flashback again, which has turned out to be one of the more popular features during this legislative session. You know, we are met in the halls by folks who can remember those. So we were able to go back and ask them some questions about those days of Tom Scott versus David Scott. A lot of them did remember when both Senators Scott were in the Senate at the same time.
Precisely. And that is our program for this, the 15th legislative day of the 2010 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Susan Hoffman.
And I'm Wandy Lawson. Please join us tomorrow for Lawmakers at 7 p.m. right here on GPB.
Good night, everyone.
Funding for Lawmakers comes from
the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of Georgia's business community, over 4,000 members strong, working with lawmakers for over 90 years to make sure that our state remains a place where companies thrive.
And by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.